Hello, I'm Emma, and last semester I made my very first game with zero coding experience, and I just wanted to walk you guys through it. So firstly, our professor assigned us a video game. It had to be 2D, and everybody was going to make their own game completely alone. So I decided that I was going to make a point-and-click adventure game because I thought it would be the easiest to code. And one thing about me is that I am a 2D artist, and I've been trying to teach myself pixel art even before this semester started. So my idea was that I was just going to lean on my art kind of as a crutch, and I was just going to choose the genre that I thought would be the easiest to code. This PowerPoint was due on day 2 of class, and we also had to have the world and the player fleshed out a little bit, which I appreciate because it made things move pretty quickly. So I wanted it to be kind of a magical school environment where you play as a bad student who doesn't know what their final exam is. They don't know how to make the final potion, so the gameplay is going to kind of be you have to find the clues and the items in order to make the final potion. And then we had to design a little bit of the gameplay. Obviously, it's just a point-and-click adventure game where you're going to talk to people, gather items, gather clues, and eventually solve the puzzle. So I didn't actually record anything while I was making the game, but because I had to bring this project back and forth between class and school, and I didn't know how to use GitHub, I have a bunch of different versions of my project saved to my flash drive that we could just go through and look at. But first, we have to look at some art I made. As I said, I'm way more comfortable with art than I am with coding. I had only ever been in one programming class before this, and it was an online class, and I don't do very good in online classes. I'm sorry, professor, but I really didn't absorb much from that class. So I wanted to start with the art because that's what I was most comfortable with, and luckily our first assignment was to make the title screen. It really just meant making the functionality of the title screen in Godot, but I took that as an opportunity to actually draw my title screen. I wanted my title at first to be Passing Potions 101, as if you're trying to pass the class Potions 101, but just to fit it nicely in this font, I went with Potions 101. And this is the title screen, and this is kind of what I took all of the style information from. At this point, I also spent a lot of time planning in between classes about the story, how the puzzle was going to connect, the different rooms. I knew I wanted there to be 3 different environments for the character to go back and forth between, so I decided on a classroom, a kitchen, and a garden. I also decided on a couple of characters that were going to be present, such as the teacher, the chef in the kitchen, and maybe a couple of classmates, and I was trying to kind of figure out how the puzzle would work, who you needed to talk to figure out which information, where you needed to collect certain ingredients. So the puzzle at the end would be for you to make the potion that is assigned as your final project for the Potion 101 class. And at this point, we had to make the sprites for our player character and some animations. So here are some walking and idle animations for my little player character. It's just supposed to be a little wizard boy. And I didn't have to, but because I knew there was going to be NPCs that were important, I also wanted to make some sprites for them. So I made a sprite for the teacher, kind of a satyr type character. The chef is an earth golem with plants growing out of him. And your fellow classmates are a little owl and a little siren. Then for one of our assignments, we had to lay out the environments. So I just made little sketches. Here's the classroom. We've got our little teacher character over here, the big cauldron where you're gonna make your potions. A little blackboard, tables for the students. I made the garden, so I wanted there to be plants here, and that was gonna be some of the items that you collect. And then a pond. I was thinking there was gonna be some Eye of Newt ingredient as well, which I didn't get to. I was originally thinking, oh, there's gonna be 3 ingredients that you have to make, but that didn't end up happening. And then we have our kitchen where the chef is gonna live, and you're gonna have to maybe do something, chop up an ingredient, grind something in the mortar and pestle over in the kitchen. And my idea for this area was that the chef was going to be blocking your ability to get into the kitchen. So you were going to have to befriend the chef somehow before you have access to these equipments. These environments went through a lot of iteration, which you'll see while we go through the different versions of my project, but I just wanted to show you the final versions of these environments. This is the classroom. This is what the garden ended up looking like. I love how the pond came out. And here's the kitchen. So now let's hop into looking at the actual coding of the game. So this is the very first version I have saved on my computer. You can see a lot of placeholder art. We have the main menu set up with some strange buttons because my art didn't really match the tutorial that my teacher gave us to make the main menu. But the buttons do work. You can play the game. I had the point and click set up from a tutorial that I watched, which I'll show the code in a second, but he moves kind of strangely, you know, around. There's no collision, so he can just kind of go anywhere. And I didn't know how to set up a camera on him, so at this point, I didn't know how to make the camera kind of move with him. So even though there's an entire classroom to the left of this, I didn't know how to make him. It just kind of goes off the screen if you go too far this way. So I had a couple of scripts with the player movement, with the clicking mechanic. All of this is made in Godot, by the way. That's what we had to use for our class, which I like because it's supposed to be more beginner friendly. I was also trying to play around with an object of how to kind of click on an object. So I saw a tutorial online for this base object, which I placed over here. And I had this idea of there was going to be a piece of paper on this desk that you can click. And it actually kind of worked. If you can see in the console down here, when my player enters the area, it was called by a student left their paper. A student left their papers desk. So there you go. It didn't really work for what I needed it to do. I used a lot of tutorials that didn't end up being in the final game because they weren't exactly what I needed them to do. Okay, so continuing with the theme of trying to figure out how to pick up items, I now have an interactable, an interacting component, and an object. And you put the interacting component on the player. And so through a tutorial, I was able to make it so when the player comes close to it, E to interact, and you press E, and then down here it says player looks at paper. Oh my goodness. I still end up scrapping this entire thing because it's not exactly what I needed to do. But in this version, I also set up the kitchen and the garden, and you can see that the kitchen and garden are still a little bit bare. Like there's a couple items missing from the final piece, but they're pretty good. And maybe I even have a way to enter them. I see the boxes, these buttons. Oh my goodness. So at this point, I still can't move. Oh my gosh, I added a camera. Look at that. I grew so much between the last version and this version. There's now a camera on the player so he can move back and forth. And I can click on these texture buttons, which I use texture buttons for so many things in this version, to get between the scenes. So I can now travel between all three environments. Isn't that fun? And there's this camera on the player in each of these scenes, and I just set the limits to be what that scene needs. So they're kind of different because this kitchen is in a slightly different position than this classroom because you start in the middle of this kitchen, but you start at the left of the classroom and whatever. And at this point, I really had no idea what I was doing. These tutorials seemed very complicated for no reason. The interacting component that you put on the player, I wasn't understanding any of it. I was just following the tutorial bar for bar, and it just was not clicking, but I did it and it worked, but it kind of wasn't the exact thing I needed it to do, but I didn't understand it enough to actually augment it to my exact needs. But I was proud of myself for one thing, and it goes all the way back to my professor's first lesson on how to make the main menu screen, because he taught us how to use buttons to change the scene. So I would use this new game button and it would change the scene to the classroom, and I repurposed that to make these doors to go in between the classroom, kitchen, and garden. And I was pretty proud of that because it meant I understood something and I was repurposing it in a different area, and I wasn't just copying off a tutorial bar for bar. It might seem very simple, but I used these texture buttons. And actually, these were regular buttons because that's what he had us use in the main menu. But later on, I changed them to texture buttons because texture buttons, you can put a texture on top of it, but you can also just not put a texture on top of it and it can be invisible. So instead of having these black bars in your game, they're invisible. And that's what I use for every single button in my game. So now we've got a little bit more art in the classroom and I'm playing around with a different way to pick up items. So if you see this ink bottle, I had made a new scene for this ink bottle. I was following a tutorial where you could pick up an item and it would go into your inventory, which is what I wanted. So this ink bottle script was once again from a tutorial, but I'm basically completely ignoring the previous tutorial I made with this interacting component object. I'm completely ignoring that now. Now we're on a new tutorial, okay? Okay. It looks like something in this version is very broken and it won't let me open it. So let's move on to a later version to hopefully see what happens. Okay, in the next one, I actually implement the teacher as well as the base inventory system for the ink bottle. This is where the bubble burst. This wonderful man whose tutorial I found ended up being the creator of a Godot add-on called Dialogue Manager, which enabled my entire game to be made. I found his tutorial. It's the one that allowed me to create this ink bottle with a collision shape and a texture button. Basically, when the player enters the collision shape, the button becomes enabled. And when you click on the button, it opens the dialogue. And the dialogue is determined by this dialogue manager, which is very easy, very intuitive. I highly recommend him. This was the point where I realized I can build my entire game. So let me show you how it works. I did a little test where I implemented the teacher, and the teacher also has kind of a similar thing going on where he has a collision shape and a texture button. And when the player enters this aura around him, the player can click on the teacher and it'll make it so you talk to the teacher. And the dialogue manager has a built-in dialogue box and everything. So I was just testing it out. So I can come over here and click on this teacher. The teacher says, "Hello, anything I can help you with?" And it gives you an option to add dialogue boxes and options. So I click on answer one. He says answer one because I was just testing it out. And then he says, "I wonder where my ink bottle went." And around here, again, there's no collisions. I can just walk anywhere I want. I can walk over here and grab the ink bottle. And it says an ink bottle. Oh my goodness. And it's in my inventory. This wasn't exactly a part of Nathan's videos. I think I combined it with a different tutorial. But then once you have it, you go back over to the teacher. Doesn't matter what you click, but he says, "Is that my ink bottle?" Because now I have the ink bottle and I can give it to the teacher. Oh my goodness. And that's all done in these else if statements because you set your status. Once you take the ink bottle, you set your ink bottle status to has. And when you're talking to the teacher, starting from teacher start to end, if your status of ink bottle is has, then the teacher will ask, "Is that my ink bottle?" And once you give it to the teacher, it sets your ink bottle status to gave. And if your ink bottle status is gave, he says, "Thank you." Oops, I'm breaking things. And then of course, else, if your ink bottle status isn't to have or gave, he says, "I wonder where my ink bottle went." So this is kind of the technology that I use to determine whether or not the player has an item and what the NPCs say in accordance to that. And this is what made me realize that I can just make my entire game using this technology. And I'm forever thankful to Nathan Hode on YouTube because he made my entire game possible. In this next version, I implemented the chef in the kitchen. So he has the same utility with the collision shape and the button. And I made a new dialogue for the chef. So the entire puzzle with the chef, spoilers, is that he has rosemary growing out of his body. And if you give him a rosemary from the garden, that's how you will gain his friendship or whatever to be able to get to the other side of the kitchen. So in the dialogue, he'll talk to you, and your rosemary status, when you pick it up in the garden, it'll set it to has. And if it is has, you can give it to him. And then once you give it to him, you're going to be able to enter the kitchen. Now, in reality, it didn't work exactly like that because I did not yet know how to set up not being able to get into the kitchen before that. You can also pick up these other flowers, but the rosemary is the one I really focused on because I actually wanted to have dialogue with it. I didn't have any dialogue with the other ones. Another problem is that when you come back from the garden, you still spawn where you spawn at the beginning of the game. You just always spawn here, even if you're coming out of the left door, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can talk to the chef. What are you doing in here? The owl said he was hungry is another plot line, but he's going to talk about all this stress is making his flowers fall out. Haven't been able to grow any more rosemary recently. And then if you talk to him again, oh, okay. It's a little janky, okay? It doesn't exactly work yet, but the other part that doesn't work is the fact that you can get into the kitchen no matter what, even before you give him the rosemary. So there's still a lot of little things I have to figure out. So originally, one of my solutions I came up with to make sure you can't get into the kitchen unless you give the chef the rosemary is to make 2 kitchens. So there's a small kitchen and then there's a regular kitchen. And in the classroom door scene, if you have given the rosemary to the chef already, then you get teleported to the regular kitchen. But if you haven't given the rosemary to the chef, you go to the small kitchen. So at the very beginning of the game, if you go in here, it's the small kitchen. And you can't see anything else. And there's a little more dialogue here. If you say, "Can I use the kitchen?" He says, "This place ain't for kids, go back to class." And then he kind of tells you that he wants rosemary. So we also have the owl now, and we'll talk about him a little later. And we've also gotten some dialogue for the rest of the plants. Now there's 3 different plants. All right, we'll just pick them all up and they go into your inventory. Very nice. You still don't spawn in the right place going back from the garden. But now I can give it to him. So could I use the kitchen? Doesn't matter. All this stress has made my flowers fall out. You mean these flowers? Never mind, just leave them on the counter and go back to class. So this is supposed to make it so you can enter the kitchen, but the way I wrote the code, you can enter the kitchen, but it only triggers when you enter the door. So now if I leave and come back, now I have access to the big kitchen. But that's kind of confusing when you're playing because it should just open when he says it. So it didn't really work that way. I also implemented a mortar and pestle. I can grind up any plant with this. Oh look, I can grind up the marigold I have because I have the marigold. Now I have some fine yellow powder. And you can also ground up the rosemary and the lily. Doesn't really make sense. You can grind up the rosemary because you're supposed to have given that to the chef already. Let's go look at the owl. We've also got some dialogue with the owl. Good evening. And he is kind of here to tell us which plant we're supposed to put in the final potion. So at the end of the game, there's one ingredient that's correct and all of the others are incorrect. So you're supposed to get him to tell you which plant is used for a potion of dark sight. All of this studying has made me hungry. So he kind of says that he's hungry and he's not going to talk to you. And if you talk to the chef, he tells you to take some cookies and go. And you can click over here and you'll gain a mugwort cookie, which are the owl's favorite snack. Do you know how to brew a potion of dark sight? He's not going to tell me. Which plant do I need to use? He's not going to tell me. But do you like cookies? Of course, I have a cookie. And then he tells you the bright yellow marigold flower is the one to increase the buff attribute of your potion. He tells us to get away. I've also changed the teacher's dialogue to kind of give us a little information, you know, why do we have to brew a potion of dark sight? And he tells us that a buff potion is very useful for young witches to learn. And combined with the owl's information that yellow marigolds increase the buff attribute of our potion, that is the flower we must use. But there's one more step to the puzzle. And it looks like part of it over here, you can also click on things in the environment. So if you click on the blackboard, it kind of talks about it. Really regretting sleeping through every lecture about now because he doesn't know how to craft a potion of dark sight. You can also click on this. It's showing us how to grind plants to make them more useful. I wonder how I can get my hands on a mortar and pestle. So the actual answer to the puzzle is that you have to grind up the marigold and put the marigold powder in the cauldron, and you do that using the mortar and pestle in the kitchen. We already did that with this one, but I don't yet have the inventory showing that I have the ground up marigold. And my dialogue manager is now extremely long because of this. We have the teacher dialogue here. We have the chef dialogue, which is kind of convoluted with the rosemary status. Whenever you look at the rosemary, marigold, or lily, it says a little dialogue blurb and sets its status to has. The owl also has a lot of dialogue because he wants a cookie, so when you get the cookie, it changes. And then I have it set to, if you've already given him the cookie, he'll just keep repeating this part. I already told you the bright yellow marigold has buffing properties. Now leave before anyone sees us conspiring. So even if you've already given it to him, but you're kind of stuck in the puzzle, I want you to be able to go back and keep getting this information, because this genre of game usually has it gets people stuck sometimes. Sometimes you get a little stuck and you have to go back and visit old things you've done. You have to go back and forth looking at things, talking to people, even if you've already done that. That's just kind of what this genre is about, so I kind of wanted to make sure that even if people had already done things, they could still go back and reread it. Oh, I also added the siren. So I had the siren and she wasn't really doing anything, but I just put her in the garden because my original idea was to have 3 ingredients. So I was going to have an Eye of Newt situation, and that was kind of going to be her job, is to be near the pond with the newts. I know Eye of Newt isn't an actual newt eye, but it would be funny. But she's just here and she just says hi. Also, my professor and I tried to work together to make sure the player is facing the way you're going, and it actually works really badly. When you click, he faces the way you're going. But if you double click here, I'm gonna click twice. Now, if I continue clicking, click, 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 he's basically always facing the opposite way we need him to face. Unless you only click once and then wait to stop, and then once and then... Oh my goodness, it's actually just so bad and we didn't understand how to fix it. Let's look at our player script really quickly. Yeah, it's all of this randomness, flipping the sprite on the horizontal axis, true and false, and clicking, and I sat with my professor for a while trying to figure this out, and we just couldn't. To his credit, he teaches this class, he knows a lot about 2D games, but I don't think point and clicking is his strong suit, because most of these games that the students make are WASD or the arrow keys, and he didn't really know how to solve this problem, but eventually he helped me, and we did in a later version of the game. So now comes my struggle with the mortar and pestle, because I realized that if you've already given the rosemary to the chef, it didn't really make sense to also be able to grind up the rosemary after that, but I didn't really figure this out at that point. But I wanted the rosemary, marigold, and lily of the valley options to show up at once, not just one after the other like in the previous station. So I made this giant, random, convoluted if statement to try to make that happen, and let's see if it did. Also, I can tell the looking horizontally is working. I'm clicking many times and it's looking pretty good. So let's grab all these and go look at the mortar and pestle, and we're still spawning in the wrong spot. And I see the kitchen is still a problem. I have to leave and come back to get to the big kitchen. We're gonna fix that later, okay? Let's see. Nope, it's still coming up one at a time. Grind marigold, grind rosemary, and grind lily. Unfortunate, even after all that work. But I also put these in here, the blackboard, the bookshelf, and the grinding poster in the classroom. When you look at them, it kind of just gives you a little flavor text, a little extra information, Kind of cute. And the siren also has a purpose. She also just kind of hammers home the fact that you have to grind up the flowers, because it was a little confusing. The only way you would know you have to grind up the flowers is from that poster, and I don't expect every single person's going to look at that. So I figured a good reason the siren could be at the pond is if she's washing her hands after grinding up the flowers. So let's go see that in game. So she says, "Hey, how's it going?" You can say, "It's going okay. What are you doing?" "I'm just washing my hands. Grinding up those flowers sure gets messy." Grinding flowers? And she kind of says, "Oops, the teacher didn't tell me I could share the information." Kind of telling you that it's a secret because, you know, everybody's working on their final project right now, but she had to do it because that's just a step to the project. And you can just say you don't want to talk to her and walk away. So now I have figured out collisions. So every scene has this shape, which I kind of drew going around these objects. So this is the one in the classroom. This is the one in the kitchen. And this is the one in the garden. And there's also a collision shape around the pond so that we can't walk into the pond. But after adding these collisions, I came to an epiphany about the kitchen and how to make it go from the small kitchen to the big kitchen seamlessly. I added this collision shape, which when you give the chef the rosemary, it disappears. So in the kitchen script, if you've given the rosemary status, the collision shape gets disabled. So in game, we can look at all the collisions. So you can't walk up into the walls. You can't walk into the cauldron. Oops, I'm clicking on the teacher. We can stop talking to the teacher. It's pretty good in my opinion. You can kind of explore everywhere you want to, but only where you realistically could be able to walk. I like standing over here. I also implemented the animation. He constantly walks right now. There is an idle animation, but I wasn't able to figure out how to make it switch to the idle animation when you're idling and standing still. But right now he's just walking all the time, so let's go give the chef the rosemary. We can also look at the mortar and pestle again. I've also made it so, this was a while ago, but there's no longer visible black boxes. They're just texture buttons now, so you don't see them. And now you just still spawn over here. That's still a problem. In here, you can't walk above the counter. And you also can't walk further than over here, which is even better than before, because before you could still walk all the way over here, but now you get stuck right here, so it's more obvious that something is preventing you from getting there. You mean these flowers? Boom. And the second you do that, you don't have to leave the kitchen and come back. The collision shape just gets disappeared. And then you can come over here and use the mortar and pestle. And I've also fixed the problem where they come up once at a time. I've removed the rosemary, and now you can just choose between marigold and lily of the valley. Now I have some fine yellow power. And it says, the owl says they're good for buffing up a brew. Lily of Valley, I'm not sure what this is used for. That I was so proud of, because that was another solution that I came up with on my own just after my teacher taught me how to put the collision shapes in the environment, but I used that knowledge to solve a different problem. That's what I was proud of, you know what I mean? And the dialogue for the mortar and pestle was pretty easy too. I looked at more of Nathan's tutorials. He goes more in depth, and I found out he has a function where you can use these brackets. You can set up the two dialogue options on the same line, but then in these brackets, they only show up if marigold status is has, or if lily status equals has. So no more convoluted, really long dialogue for the mortar and pestle. And there's also the cauldron, so we can look at that as well. I used the same functionality for the cauldron. I've set this up at this point. You can also click on the cauldron. The large cauldron bubbles. It is hot to the touch. Whatever you throw into this cauldron will turn into your final potion. Are you ready to brew the potion? And I give the player many opportunities to say, no, I need more time, because this is finalized. Yes, I'm ready to brew my potion. Outstanding. Which ingredient would you like to use? So you have the list of all the possible ingredients that you can collect in the game, but they're all grayed out. I don't want to add anything yet. But then say if I go grab all 3 of these potions, or flowers, my fault, and we go back. Yes, I'm ready to brew the potion. Now you have an option between these 3. You add the bright yellow marigold to the pot. And at this point, I did not implement winning and losing yet. So when you do that, you would lose the game. If you add any of these to the pot, you lose the game, you have to restart, blah, 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 but that wasn't implemented yet, but I used the same functionality from the mortar and pestle over here. At this point, I also have a folder down here called Not Being Used that contains everything from tutorials that didn't exactly work out the way I wanted them to. And at this point, I'm pretty set in what I need. Every single thing you click on has a 2D sprite, a collision shape, and a texture button. And that gives the functionality of being able to talk to them and pick up items, and dialogues, which I have set up the cauldron with, and the mortar and pestle, as well as all of the actual dialogues for the characters. Now the biggest thing I had left to do was implement the winning and losing. So this is the win screen I figured out, and this is the little lose screen I made, and let's see how it works in game. First, I'm just gonna grab a random cookie, because this is something you could throw into the cauldron if you don't want to give it to the owl. You could just brew a cookie potion. Are you sure you want to add the cookie to the pot? Yes. But you fail, and then you have to quit, and let's see what it looks like if you win. So you need to grab the rosemary plant and the marigold plant. I'm still spawning in the wrong spot over here. I enlist my professor to help me with that. You can see I've also changed the chef sprite to make the rosemary on his body look a little better. And I've also added animations to all the NPCs, just little idle animations, he's just bopping up and down. And I also added parentheses. You mean these flowers? Give your rosemary to the chef, so that the player is a little more clear on what they're doing. Okay, and now we can come over here and grind up the marigold. And I still haven't added the powders to the inventory, but you can see that I added sprites to the inventory, so they're not just gray squares anymore. I've actually added real art to them. But now that we have ground the marigold, we can do that. Yes, and you will pass. I also don't have any audio right now, but at this point, I realized that this game is going to be playable and finished. So I enlisted the help of my coworker, who goes by Meat Obelisk on Spotify, who loves making music. He told me if I ever need music for this game, just to hit him up, and I would really like a background track for this game. So I texted him, I was like, hey, this is gonna be a finished thing. You wanna make some music? And he made the background looping track for my whole game. It sounds amazing. It adds so much charm, so much character. Love him. Go check him out. He made this game come to life with that. And here you can hear the music. Sounds great. Very whimsical, very nice. And I've also added some animations for the smoke. And I've added a couple extra inventory slots because I made it so you can actually see the ground up plants in your inventory, and I'll show you how I did that. I also got the idle animation working with the help of my professor. My professor also, I didn't know how to do this at all, but he fixed coming from the garden. So now when you come back to the kitchen from the garden, you spawn in the right spot. He did that with these spawn positions. This is the little script he made for it, but basically he fixed it. And I'm, you know what, thank you, because I didn't know how to do that. But what I did do on my own is fix the inventory so that it shows up with the ground pictures. The inventory script was made with a tutorial which I didn't understand. So my solution to add the ground up plants is to just add a picture of them right here, and they'll start off the game invisible, and then when you gain the item, it will become visible. So they're always going to be in the last 2 spots, even if it's like the first thing you gain. These 2 spots can be empty when you get these 2. They're just always going to be in these same spots because they're not actually inventory items. They're just pictures on top of the inventory that are invisible and then become visible. But you know what? It worked for what I needed it to do. Basically, if your marigold status is ground, they become visible, but they start off the game invisible. So let's see how that works in game. So if I give the rosemary to the chef, get into the kitchen, use my mortar and pestle, grind marigold, there it is. And if I go back to the mortar and pestle and grind the lily of valley, there it is. These two don't go away. This slot is open because you could also get a cookie. You know, it's not a perfect solution, but it worked, and I'm okay with that. And perhaps the most important thing I did was add this cat. And I didn't talk to you about the animation, I just put the frames of the animation into the animation sprite, and it'll play. Basically, I have a little black cat named Pumpkin in real life, and I had to add her to this witchy game as a little homage. So once you get into the kitchen, you'll find her, and she just meows at you. And there you go. That's basically this entire game completed. There's also a couple sound effects when you pick up an item and win and lose the game. The beautiful background music made by Meat Obelisk, and all of the hours that I spent coding and drawing for this game. Each version of the game is about an hour and a half worth of work, and I have about 25 versions saved. So that's a lot of time. It might not look like that complicated of a project, but it was my very first time, and I went through a lot of tutorials, a lot of learning to get to this point, and that's not even including the hours that I clocked on a sprite. I was super proud of these backgrounds. Again, the art is the thing I'm comfortable with, but it was so fun to do this entire project, and it was really fun watching everybody else in the class work as well. This project was just super fun, and I was very proud of myself that it actually became playable and finished in the end, because at the beginning of the semester, I didn't know if that was exactly gonna be true. My game went from bare bones, and by the way, can I just talk about how I love this little blackboard, how I made it so it looked like an eraser had been over it a bunch of times. But anyway, it went all the way from that to this mess of collisions and sprites and animations, and watching my progress was just so fun. This was only over the period of 4 months of a semester, so I was able to submit it to itch.io. We had to for our final assignment, but I'm very proud that it's actually playable. So I have a few screenshots of the game here on the itch page. Itch.io is just a place that you can post your game, even if it's not finished, just so people can see it, comment on it, just so it has an area to live in, maybe in your portfolio or whatever. So yeah, I have a little walkthrough here in case people get stuck in the actual puzzle. And if you want to play it for yourself, it's going to be linked in the description. You just have to press the full screen button and you can try it for yourself. And I would love if you let me know what you think of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to make another one of these videos after this upcoming semester where I have to do the entire thing again using a 3D engine. Goodbye!